Hello, everyone. It's Will here. Today, I want to talk about a bit of an analysis I did to find out where the ideal measurement location is when doing time dependent measurements in car audio. So, what really got me started on this whole thing was figuring out, the best location in my car to place the microphone, because I'm using a single microphone, not a mic array, to go from two ears, like our hearing, into one place. And I was getting inconsistent results when doing anything with timing or phase for impulse responses. Um, you know, Following the different guidelines I found, so place in front of your nose, in the middle of your head, Um, and these sort of methods varied by plus or minus a few inches, but that's enough to be, pretty substantial in terms of effects on our hearing sensitivity. So I wanted to figure out, quantitatively, what is the location with the least error for taking these time dependent measurements, and then how much uncertainty in that measurement can I expect, right? So at the ideal location, how much error still remains. So to sort of jump to the end, I created this heat map. So it shows the X and Y position of the microphone from the top view. So like you're looking into my vehicle from above. And the color outlines the error associated with that location. So with that map of the space, I can then figure out what the coordinates of the location with the least error are, and that will tell me what in my vehicle is the ideal measurement microphone location and the gradient outwards as well. And then also with that, I have an idea of how much error I can still expect in that measurement. Cool, so today I'm going to be going through the assumptions behind this and the methodology, because if you agree with those, we'll be okay, but if you disagree with those, then you probably will disagree with the conclusions I make later, so just to be transparent about the reasoning behind this. And then also, what I assume most people are interested in is the implementation. So, cool, we have this data, but how could I recreate this and find this location in my vehicle? And then, how can you, without this analysis of your vehicle, find the ideal measurement microphone location? Great. So, that just, like I said, an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So let's get started. Cool. So to make sure we're on the same page, when you only consider interaural time differences, your brain will perceive a sound as coming from directly in front of you if it arrives at your left and your right ears at precisely the same time. And similarly, if we rotate our heads, the sound will arrive at the right ear sooner than the left ear. And this timing difference helps contribute to our brain localizing the sound around us. So now let's hop into a car. And so this slide represents sort of a car setup. So we have someone sitting in the driver's position, looking towards the stereo center on the dash. We have mid-ranges, in the dash as well, and tweeters in the sail panels. So how do we time align this system? Well, this model assumes that all the left speakers should arrive at the left ear at the same moment that the right speakers should arrive at the right ear to recreate that phantom center and make sure everything is in time and in phase. Another thing I considered when mapping this space and figuring out the ideal locations was the orientation of the head at the listening position. This is a point that I don't really see get brought up very often, but I would believe that we should be calculating the ideal locations based on when the head is oriented towards the stereo center. And going back to that first example, when you have a sound that arrives like it's directly in front of you, you want to make sure that that sound arrives in your left and your right ear at the same time. So to me, it doesn't make sense to set everything up if you're facing forward in the driver's seat, because I imagine that would make your timings have a left shift bias in them. And if you disagree with this point, then don't worry, you can still follow the implementation later, but this is how I set up my map of the space, and so my heat maps are reflective of this point. So now with those assumptions, we can quantify the error. And I did that by comparing the ideal delay measurement to the delay measurement that that microphone location would actually produce. And that's really just a comparison of the distance between the ear and the speaker, and the distance between the speaker and the microphone measurement location. So I did that for each location. I iterated through the entire sound system to get the overall error of that location by considering all the speakers. So with that, I could then iterate through the entire plane to get a map of the error of the space, and these calculations did not consider reflections. These calculations were also in 2 dimensions, but this enabled me to figure out the point with the least error, which I am labeling as the ideal measurement location. So that last graph that I showed you was using the speaker locations that are in this PowerPoint so that we can overlay it relative to something else and get an idea of what's really going on. So one thing I find interesting is that the location is not really where you would imagine it to be, at least not where I imagined it to be. It's a lot more offset, at least symmetrically in the head, than I anticipated. It's also a lot more forward than I anticipated. But what I noticed is that it lies along the radius of where the speakers intersect. And that makes sense going back to how I calculated error, is that you'd expect to see less error along the radius around the speakers, because at those points your timing measurements will be the same. And we can see here, let's see if I can outline it on this PowerPoint, right? We have these lines, and they are consistent with the radiuses of the speakers. And the point of least error lies where those radiuses intersect. So now with that model, I then inputted data from my vehicle so we can get an idea of what's actually going on in the real world. So in this example, we have tweeters in the sail panels, mid-ranges on the dash, mid-bass in the door, and then a subwoofer in the trunk. And the minimum error location was pretty similar to the example we last went over. I also want to point out that the overall error for that minimum was surprisingly high at over 4 inches. And it makes sense, but I was surprised by it only because this is a theoretical calculation. And so it just really goes to show that there is no ideal location. You're always going to have some uncertainty or some problem with your measurement. I also want to point out that, putting it just in the head really doesn't seem to suffice, because going from the back of the head, you're looking at, 30 to 40 inches of air, so almost 10 times as much air as opposed to the ideal location. So I think it really just does illustrate that measurement mic location is important. Um, so now, how can we find this minimum in our vehicles without doing a map of the space like I've done? So the method that I was taught that most consistently aligns with the results I found today is to figure out where your mid-range drivers radiuses to your ears intersect. So you can do that by taking a piece of string and attaching it to the grill of your left mid-range driver, and then taking it to your left ear. Take a piece of string, attach it to your right mid-range driver, and go to your right ear. Okay, then orient your head where you want the center to be, and then tie those two pieces together. And that will be the ideal measurement location, because now your mid-range delay timing error will be very good, and the other speakers will be not ideal but still pretty good. And you can see with those blue lines that I have shown on this slide, right, those are like the pieces of the string. Where they intersect is pretty dang close to what I've numerically determined to be the minimum. And when you do this in your car, I think you'll be surprised on where this actually ends up. Um, it seems to be a little more right shifted and forward than um, I expected, but it's not consistently just in the middle of the headrest or at the tip of your nose, like sort of more general guidelines recommend. So yeah, so that's really the conclusions that I've come through this analysis. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Um, so, I'm still learning, and so this is just sort of what I've come to by sort of thinking through it logically, and just making a heat map. So let me know if you learned something, and I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching.